Hello, Rock Mentors and others that are actually looking through this video. The intention of this is kind of to develop a little bit of content so you can kind of see a variety of ways to actually create some of these training videos that we might end up doing in a variety of ways. But this is something that I'm actually developing as far as showing a variety of things, a little bit of our equipment that we actually have here with the Robotics of Central Kitsap, and this is also going to kind of show different parts of the assembly of the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B that we actually have, that actually is attached to a touch screen that Raspberry Pi also sells with its own casing that's set up. And you can actually use this to go through, just in case we have any issues with our Raspberry Pi itself. You can actually look at the basic breakdown of the Raspberry Pi component level stuff, so you can actually fix things. So I have the secondary camera, so you can actually see like close up like the components of what I'm actually going to be talking about. But I also have everything so I can actually show you on screen too. But the Raspberry Pi 4s that we do have, they have a touch screen that's actually that's capable, because it's actually going to be linked in with a ribbon cable to the Raspberry Pi itself. But these kits that we bought, it has the Raspberry touch screen with the circuit board on the back of it, and then it has 4 mounts that are there that actually connect to the circuit board of the display unit itself. So you can actually put the 4 screws through the Raspberry Pi 4 in order to actually mount it, which this is the Raspberry Pi 4. It has 2 USB 3.0s. It has 2 USB 2.0s. It has an Ethernet connection. It has 2 micro HDMI's. It has a Usbc connector for applying power to it. And then you'll notice as we go through this, it actually has a display sync that you can actually put a ribbon cable into this display unit that will actually connect with it. And then this right here is what's called I can actually show it right here. This is your GPIO connection on the Raspberry Pi itself, that allows you to put multiple jumpers on it to supply power, do multiple things. So these kits that we actually got came with a setup to where it does give you a ribbon cable that actually attaches the touch screen to the Raspberry Pi, and it also gives you 4 jumpers that we actually have. These 4 jumpers are more than enough, because you actually only need 2 of them to connect the power source, basically, because you have power that's going to be coming into the Raspberry Pi, and then it's going to be shared through its GPIO bus into the display unit itself. And I'll show you how to actually connect that as well, so you can actually see how everything is kind of set up. So one of the first things that I talked about right here is these 4 mounts that are on the display unit, as you can see, and they have 4 screws that are in them, so you can actually attach your Raspberry Pi to it. And one thing, especially in electronics, it is important to, if you're working in an environment where you can actually be creating a lot of static discharge, it is important to actually have some Esd straps that allow you to discharge the static, so you don't actually damage your circuit boards. But if you're very careful and you're not touching the circuits themselves, you're not putting your fingers on it, you're not actually getting close enough to actually put static discharge on any of your microprocessing units on the circuit boards itself, you should be okay. So just be careful and be leery of actually touching the circuit board itself with your fingers, like sticking your fingers down on it. And then even when you're handling the Raspberry Pi, make sure you're holding at the edge and you're not rubbing your fingers on these things. In some kits, they actually do have attachments that you can actually put basically heat suppressors, as well as other mounts and everything that you can mount a heat sink to your processing units and everything, so it helps dissipate heat. And if you have never seen a heat sink before, unfortunately these kits don't have them, but a heat sink itself is usually a piece of aluminum that actually has like a bunch of ridges on it, and that actually just increases its surface area, so it actually has the ability for more heat dissipation. But unfortunately these setups don't actually have heat sinks that go on our microprocessing units that are on our Raspberry Pis. But it'll be okay because the unit itself does have a lot of area that actually will allow it to dissipate heat. And then there is a plastic casing that's going to go on the back. You're going to see me attach that. And then the units also do come with a 32 gig card that is pre-installed with a lot of information, so you can actually have the Raspberry the Raspberry Pi OS that's actually sets up. It's based off a Linux build, so it's like a Linux OS that actually is set up specifically for Raspberry Pis. So it works well for the unit, so it actually can set up a lot of the pre-install stuff like your Python coding IDE, as well as a Scratch 3.0s on it. There's quite a few things that are automatically set up on the Raspberry Pi 4 that actually allow you to do quite a bit of stuff with it. So I'm going to go through this assembly real quick. One thing that you'll note, like I said, there's the 32 gig card. On the Raspberry Pi 4 itself, there is that slot that's down there. And you can insert your micro SD card. Make sure that the label is facing out, basically the ridge on top. So when you slide it in there, it'll be seated in there. Basically the foil runs are on the base, so it actually has connection that way, and you'll feel it basically sink in there. Once you get it in there, it'll be seated well enough that it's not going to move around or anything. And then taking that Raspberry Pi 4, we're going to be mounting it onto the display unit. Basically, it's going to be lined up like that. But first, before we do that, we're going to be putting our jumpers on, and we're also going to be putting the ribbon cable on. So one thing that you'll notice, these ribbon cables are actually put into basically this set up pre-installed port that allows these ribbon cables to be basically cinched in there with like a little small plastic wedge. So right now you'll take this black thing and it lifts out, so it basically lifts out of the seating, so it's not wedged in there, and it allows some space. So when you do put that ribbon cable in there, then you pinch that back down on it, and the ribbon cable seats and basically makes a good connection. So like I'm saying, the ribbon cable itself, we'll take the ribbon cable and make sure that the foil runs are up, and the foil runs are going to be facing the same direction as where you can actually put it into there, to where the wedge that's going to cinch back on it is behind it, and then you seat that down in there, and it basically pinches it closed. And you'll know that it's pinching down when you actually look at that part right there, and you see that there's like no space in there, so it's actually cinched down. And you can tell that it's actually seated properly because you'll see that the foil runs don't show that much over the actual connector on the circuit board itself. And then we're going to end up just running that foil, that ribbon cable over this way and putting it into the circuit board for the display unit itself. So we'll run that in there, and then you're going to do that same thing. You're going to cinch that piece. Now, it might be hard to do it with your fingers, so it's good to use like a small unit to where you can poke that wedge and you can reseat it back in there. Now remember, when you're taking this back out, don't just yank that ribbon cable out, because if you're having to take it apart, what you're going to have to do is unseat that wedge so it's easier to put that so it's easier to pull the ribbon cable out, because when that wedge is taken out, that ribbon cable will just pop right out. So put that ribbon cable there. And you might have to work it back and forth, just kind of push that wedge in there until you get both sides seated back in and it's completely seated. And then that will pinch down that ribbon cable so it will be steady in there. Don't yank on it badly, but you can tell that it's in there if you just give it a very delicate pull, and it has a lot of resistance to it. So now we sit that board right there. And then on the other side, you're going to see that there is some pins here. There are 5 pins that basically have connections for running power into the display circuit board, right? So of the jumpers, we're just picking the red and the black one because red is normally your hot wire. It represents a hot wire. And then your black one is normally a ground. Sometimes you can use green. It just depends on kind of your personal preference. Ground is normally green, and then black is normally kind of your 0. But green and black can kind of represent the same thing. And in this case, we're just basically connecting a ground wire. So the one all the way closest to the post right there is, if you look on the circuit board, you'll see that that's the 5 volt. So you'll want to connect your red jumper to that 5 volt one. And then for your black one, you're going to take that black one and you're going to go all the way to the right of that, or all the way furthest from the post. And that's going to connect to your ground. So now we have jumpers on both those, and we can actually take this board and we can put the screws in there to completely mount it. And it's nice, especially when you're working on electronics and everything, it's nice to have an electronic screwdriver that has a little bit of magnetism to it, that allows that screw to actually stay seated onto the head of the screwdriver, so you don't have to worry about it so much when you're screwing stuff down. It makes it a little bit easier to do your work. Having the proper tools for the job is always a nice thing. And then this actually is also not only just a precision screwdriver, but it also has a ratcheting mechanism as well. So it allows it to definitely work a lot better. Purchased years ago from Fry's. My own little personal, nice little precision screwdriver set. But let's get all 4 of those mounting screws in there. So we ensure that the Raspberry Pi is actually stationary to the display unit. and now it's actually connected and seated. And one thing that's important, anytime you're actually you're mounting screws onto something and you're actually putting down a circuit board or whatever, always go in a crisscross pattern as you're putting something down, because that actually helps the alignment as well. As you're especially these printed circuit boards, they have to align well because you don't want to crack them. So you don't want to like try to over tighten something and then cause the circuit board itself to crack, because that can actually damage the foil runs that are inside the circuit board, which is a bad thing. Okay, so now that we have these two jumpers, we also still got to make sure that they're reconnected, or they're actually connected to the GPIO bus on the Raspberry Pi itself. So the red one, or your 5-volt one, will actually go to the very first pin. That's basically on the outside edge, and the first pin that's closest to that screw right there. Okay, and then two more in, we're actually putting our black one on. So that will connect right there. And once we got both those connected and our ribbon cables connected, everything is connected on this, so we can actually put our plastic cover onto the Raspberry Pi itself, well, the Raspberry Pi unit at this point, and actually get it on there. So you'll notice that on the plastic cover, it actually has holes that will align to all these connectors on the Raspberry Pi, so it can actually set up, and you can just look at it and then actually see what the orientation should be at that point. So you can actually look at it, and it's basically been created so that it will actually align properly. But as you're putting it on there, make sure that you take that backing plate off, because then you can actually just put it down around to where those jumpers will stick out. Make sure that you're not pinching down on that ribbon cable, and just kind of seat it in there, and you'll feel and just look and see if you're actually aligning your connectors through the holes in the plastic casing itself. And as you do that, you can actually feel it pop into place, and it makes it so that it fits pretty good. And then just take those jumpers, don't really squeeze on them or anything, but now you can just tuck them down inside your case itself. And then the same thing with that will happen with that ribbon cable. When you just take that backer plate, and it's got little clips on it, you set it in there and it pops in. Once that's popped in, now we can actually come here and take the 4 screws that we have for actually putting the case together itself. And the nice thing about this case is we haven't gotten our cameras yet. I will make another video once we get the camera itself. But a camera can be also attached to our Raspberry Pi 4, and it'll be attached with a ribbon cable. And in this case itself, it has a little slot that we can put, we can mount the camera on the outside of this. So then the camera just sits there on the outside, and we can actually use this as a unit by itself to take minor photographs, because I do believe it's an 8 megapixel camera. So it's not high quality photos, but it's decent enough photos that it's like an old school like cell phone photo basically, that we can be doing with these. And you could just do some minor little pictures, little videos and stuff like that, which is not bad at all. But more so, I mean, it's a camera that you can actually use for creating sensing, like color sensing and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's definitely a good thing for robotics in general. So once again, that crisscross, we crisscross over, we tighten down, we don't manhandle it down, but we just tighten it down enough that you're kind of cinching it down on there, so it actually definitely is closed up. So now the unit is all closed up. These also come with the USB-C power adapter. So it's literally just a AC unit that actually plugs into the USB-C slot. Now you can also use the USB-C to normal USB plugs, and then with the additional power adapter as well. You can use those too. I've actually used them, and they're definitely creates a little bit more versatility to where you can basically plug this into basically a power USB slot on somebody's computer or something like that, and you can actually power these up as well. So there's a variety of ways to do that. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug this in and power it up so I can show you what happens when you go through your initial installs for the Raspberry Pi.